Have you ever gotten a phone call about someone you care about? He's dying. Something you knew was inevitable. You knew it was coming. But when it actually happens, you go through a great range of emotion. Now, I went through this with both of my parents. Neither one of them just dropped over dead like Mary's dad did. We went through an extended time with both of them where we had the beginning of the range of emotions that happen when you lose somebody you love. Denial, shock, acceptance, anger, and if you're a Christian, I would add hope. Now, Lent is beginning this Wednesday. We have a service at 7 o'clock, and next Sunday, which is next Sunday through Palm Sunday, Nick and I are going to be exploring the emotions that were experienced by Jesus' followers when they found out that he was going to die leading up to his death. Now, his death had been prophesied in Isaiah 750 years before Jesus was born. And even though this is a little bit of a lengthy passage, I would like to read the entire one, Isaiah chapter 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and who can speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Now, this was told, like I said, written 750 years before Jesus was born. So, the Jews were told that far in advance, he's dying. And if they had understood who Jesus was when he came into the world, they would have realized then that that scripture was written about him. Jesus, when he was alive, of course, even told his followers himself, I'm going to die. And they still had difficulty processing it. We don't like to deal with that, do we? We don't like to think about it. We don't like to plan ahead. Somebody brings it up. I don't want to talk about it. So it was just the same as when we get a prognosis that someone we love is going to die. My father had a brain bleed, which is what ultimately resulted in his death. And I mean, once that happened and we started to see him go downhill and got to the place where, you know, he would look at us, but we didn't know if he knew who we were or not. We knew that it was just a matter of time. But it didn't make it any easier when the phone rang, and it was my brother, and he said, Dad is dead. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was coming. I knew that there was no hope for recovery, but it still wasn't easy. And it never is. And a lot of times we ask questions like, why? Why did it have to be then? Why now? Why like this? I'm always reminded of a fellow I knew when I was in Lockport. His name was Mike, and his wife and kids were pretty active in church, but he would rarely ever come. And one day we were having a man-to-man conversation, and I said, Mike, what's a big deal just coming to church with your family? Oh, I'm mad at God. I'm mad at God. I don't want to go to church. Why are you mad at God? My mother died. So in my mind, I'm thinking, maybe his mother died when he was young. That would just understand why somebody might be mad at God. Or maybe she died in a tragic way. Maybe she suffered great, So I explored a little more. So when did your mother die? And he started telling me. And ultimately he tells me, I said, well, how old was your mother when she died? 85. I said, well, that's a good long life. I was trying to be gentle, but I said, at what age would it have been okay for her to die? I'll never forget his answer. Never. So you would be mad at God no matter when she died? Yes. It's never easy. No matter when we lose someone, we think, why now? Right? It's never easy. So I want to ask the question, though, why Jesus, why when, why then, and why like he did? Okay? Well, it had to be Jesus, number one, to demonstrate the love of God. But more importantly, Jesus was the only one qualified to die for our sin. Nobody else could do it. Our sin had destroyed our relationship that God had intended for us. Sin caused a separation between us and him, and Jesus had to die to pay the price for the sin that is yours and mine. It had to be Jesus. He's the only one qualified. The last time Mary and I went out to Springfield, Illinois to visit Justin and Mary Beth, we went to a museum in Springfield, which is right where they live, to the Abraham Lincoln Museum. You're not surprised to find out Abraham Lincoln's a big name out there. Okay, we got to see the house where Abraham Lincoln lived and where he first started practicing law and all kinds of cool things. But one of the things that we saw in the Abraham Lincoln Museum was a little piece of silk with blood on it. This thing they don't know what the estimated value is. Okay, it can't be bought for any amount of money. And it's significant because it's covered with Abraham Lincoln's blood. It's the dress from a young girl who was sitting near Mr. Lincoln when he was shot. And his blood splattered, and she actually held his head in her lap for a little bit, okay, before they moved him. So the state of Illinois bought that dress, cut out the piece of silk covered with the blood of Abraham Lincoln, who gave his life to set a whole race of people free. Sin results in death. Somebody or something had to die because of sin. Now let's be honest. None of us would volunteer to pay the price for our own sin, would we? I don't want to. The Old Testament is filled with all kinds of rituals and regulations for living. It's also filled with grace of a loving God. In the Old Testament, God had instituted a practice to cover the sins committed by the people, and the price of sin was paid for in blood. Right? All the sacrifice. Can you imagine coming to church in here this morning Bring in your pigeons, bring in your doves, bring in your lambs, bring in your cows, and we bring them on down, and I'm the priest, and I take the knife, and I start to slaughter. There's blood everywhere. Aren't you glad we do it like this? Sin results in blood. The price for sin is somebody's blood. Now, obviously, killing an animal is never pleasant to see. But God wanted the people to understand the consequences of their sinful actions. Your sin results in the shedding of blood. It costs something its life. In this case, like I said, the animals. The priest would take them, slaughter them, carefully dissect them, sprinkle the blood over the altar, and that paid the price for their sin. Day after day, this is what the priest did. They hear the confessions of the people. Then they shed the blood on behalf of the guilty. Sins are committed. Blood is shed. People sinned. Lives were lost. This was God's way of covering their sin. It had to be Jesus, because he was the only one qualified to shed his blood and end all that. That's why we don't have to do that anymore. His blood was shed, and our faith in that does away with all those old rituals. That's why him. But why then? Why, a little over 2,000 years ago, why did it happen then? In Galatians chapter 4, it says that this occurred in the fullness of time. In other words, when everything was just right, when everything came together just right, God sent his Son. Culturally, things were perfect. At that time, the Romans had a common language. They had a common connection. The people were primed for something new. It was God's timing. It was perfect that Jesus was born, lived, and died. That's why it had to be then. And why like that? Well, like I said, the law required that everything be cleansed with blood. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. That's in Hebrews 9. In Ephesians 1, it says, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace. And so, Jesus' blood was shed for the time you lied to your husband, the time you desired a woman who wasn't your wife, for a time you used your words to hurt instead of help, for the times you cursed God's name in anger, for the times you took what did not belong to you. For every single time you sinned, Jesus paid the price with his blood for every time you turned your back on God. That's why it had to be like that. When somebody we love dies, we ask, don't we? Why? Why them? Why now? Why like this? And I can tell you from personal experience, Mary and I have had her father literally dropping dead, getting out of his pickup truck. He died in his alfalfa field. A field that he said so many times, this looks so soft, you could just lay down in it. And he did. And we've had the extended, long, drawn-out, watching them suffer with my parents. They're both horrible. We've talked many times. I don't know which one I picked. You know, he didn't suffer, but did I tell him I love him the last time I talked to him? Here, I got to tell my mother and father I love you a million times, but watching that, I don't know. They're both bad. It's never good when we lose someone we love, is it? But it had to be Jesus, because nobody else could. Because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. He who knew no sin became sin for us. And it had to be then, because God's timing is always perfect. Remember that when you're praying for something. For whatever. That God's timing is perfect. Okay? And he had to die like he did, because the price had to be paid in blood. Let's pray. Only Jesus, Only Jesus qualified to die for us the way he did and when he did. Lord, my prayer is if there's anybody here who has not yet put their faith in that shed blood for their sin, that today would be that day. It's very simple. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just. He will forgive our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We can walk out of here this morning with everything erased.